In northwestern France, where the waters of the Atlantic Ocean flood vast sandbanks twice a day, stands one of the most mysterious monuments in human history. Mont-Saint-Michel is an island fortress, an island monastery, an island legend that has attracted pilgrims, conquerors, scholars, and seekers of truth for over 1,000 years. According to legend, the Archangel Michael appeared to the bishop and commanded him to build a temple worthy of the heavenly host. But what lies behind this beautiful legend? What secrets do the abbey's underground chambers hold? And why did the monks practice forbidden rituals within the sacred walls? Today we will reveal the secrets of Mont-Saint-Michel, from the mystical visions of the Middle Ages to the archaeological discoveries of our time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new investigations into historical mysteries. What do you think about combining Christian rites with ancient esoteric practices? Was it heresy or an attempt to preserve lost knowledge? Share your opinion in the comments. In the foggy year of 708, an event took place on the coast of Normandy that forever changed the face of these lands. Bishop Aubert of Avranches was sleeping restlessly in his chambers when the Archangel Michael appeared before him in all his heavenly glory. The formidable warrior of the heavenly host pointed to the rocky island of Mont-Saint-Michel, rising above the sea tides, and uttered a command that made the very ground beneath the holy man's feet tremble. "Build a sanctuary here in my honor," sounded the divine voice. But Aubert, struck by what he saw, did not immediately dare to carry out such a grandiose task. Could a mere mortal undertake a task that would require the efforts of more than one generation? The archangel appeared a second time, more insistently demanding that his will be done. When the second appearance also failed to have the desired effect, the heavenly protector of warriors touched the stubborn bishop's forehead with his finger, leaving a mark that contemporaries called the Archangel's finger. This mystical sign convinced Aubert to begin construction. At the top of a rocky island, which the locals called Mont-Saint-Michel, Grave Hill, the first modest church was erected. The circular structure, about 12 meters in diameter, was built of local stone and covered with a wooden roof. The architecture of the temple replicated the form of the heavenly sanctuary that the Archangel Michael had shown the bishop in a vision. But even then, at the very beginning of the future abbey's history, mysterious circumstances arose that would accompany Mont-Saint-Michel throughout the centuries to come. The workers who labored on the construction of the temple spoke of strange phenomena. Stones found their place in the masonry on their own. Scaffolding was erected overnight by unknown forces, and a source of fresh water gushed directly from the rock, where the archangel touched the ground with his sword. Several decades after Bishop Aubert's death, his successors expanded the church, adding additional rooms for the growing monastic community. In 872, the canons who served in the temple were replaced by Benedictine monks, who brought with them new traditions and a stricter monastic rule. What prompted the church authorities to make such a radical decision? The Benedictine monks immediately set about rebuilding the sanctuary. They understood that the modest 8th century church did not correspond to the grandeur of the place consecrated by the Archangel Michael himself. The new abbey had to be worthy of its heavenly patron, monumental, impregnable, and beautiful. It was then that the idea was born to create a true heavenly Jerusalem on the island, embodied in stone and rising from the waves like a vision from the apocalypse. The first abbot, Maynard, made a decision that determined the entire future of Mont-Saint-Michel. He developed a grand construction plan, according to which the abbey was to rise up the slopes of the cliff in terraces, crowned by a church at the very top. Each level symbolized one of the steps of the soul's ascent to God, and the architecture itself became the embodiment of the divine hierarchy. But where could the monks of the 9th century have found the knowledge and resources to implement such an ambitious project? The answer to this question lies in the special patronage that the abbey enjoyed from the French kings and Norman dukes. Charles the Simple granted the monastery extensive land holdings and trading privileges, while Duke Richard I the Fearless took the abbey under his personal protection, making it an outpost of Norman influence in the region. Mont-Saint-Michel stands on a tidal island surrounded by some of the most powerful tides in the world. Twice a day, the waters of the Bay of Saint-Malo recede up to 18 kilometers, exposing vast sandbanks, and then return at the speed of a galloping horse, rising to a height of up to 14 meters. This natural phenomenon transforms the island into an impregnable fortress, cut off from the mainland by turbulent waters, and then makes it accessible again to pilgrims and travelers. The island's geological history dates back to the Precambrian era. The rock on which the abbey stands is composed of Archean granites over 600 million years old. These ancient rocks are exceptionally strong and resistant to marine erosion, which has allowed the island to retain its shape for millennia. But what makes the tides in the Bay of Saint-Malo so powerful compared to other European coasts? The secret lies in the unique configuration of the seabed and coastline. The bay is funnel-shaped, narrowing towards the shore, which creates a natural tidal wave amplifier effect. When the tidal wave from the Atlantic Ocean enters the bay, it is compressed between the converging shores, and its height increases several times. In addition, the strength of the tides is influenced by the peculiarity of the lunar cycle. During the new moon and full moon, the tides reach their maximum amplitude. Medieval chroniclers describe the tides of Mont-Saint-Michel as waters of doomsday, capable of engulfing entire armies. In the 12th century, the Norman chronicler Robert de Torigny wrote, "The sea comes here with such speed that many travelers, caught off guard, have met their death in the waves." Indeed, the quicksand of the bay, which seems safe at low tide, hides a deadly danger. For centuries, the monks of the abbey studied the rhythms of the tides, creating a complex system for predicting their timing and strength. The monastery library preserves tide tables compiled as early as the 11th century, which are remarkably accurate. Knowledge of the laws of the sea was vital not only for the safety of the island's inhabitants, but also for its economic prosperity. How did an isolated island become one of the richest abbeys in medieval Europe? The answer lies in the fact that the tides that made Mont-Saint-Michel inaccessible also turned it into an ideal transshipment point for maritime trade. During low tide, the island became accessible to caravans from the mainland, and during high tide, ships could approach its walls. The monks set up a complex signaling system to warn travelers of the approaching tide. A watchtower was built on the mainland, from which signals were sent by bell ringing and smoke fires. Specially trained guides, known as St. Michael's trackers, accompanied pilgrims across the dangerous sands, knowing every safe path and every treacherous spot. The monks themselves developed unique methods of moving across the shoals. They used special wooden shoes with a wide surface that prevented them from sinking into the quicksand, as well as long poles to check the depth and density of the ground. The abbey kept specially trained horses of the local Norman breed, which instinctively sensed dangerous sections of the route. The island's climate also had unique characteristics that influenced the architecture and lifestyle of the abbey. The proximity of the sea created a mild oceanic climate with high humidity and frequent fog. In winter, the island was rarely covered with snow, but constant winds and rains required particularly sturdy structures and reliable protection from the elements. It was these natural conditions that forced the builders of the abbey to develop architectural solutions that were revolutionary for their time. At the beginning of the 11th century, Abbot Hildebert II made a decision that forever changed the appearance of Mont-Saint-Michel. The modest 8th century Carolingian church could no longer accommodate the growing number of pilgrims and did not correspond to the abbey's increased importance in the Christian world. A new grandiose structure was needed, worthy of its heavenly patron, the Archangel Michael. But how could a monumental temple be built on a tiny rocky island where every square meter of land was worth its weight in gold? The solution came in the form of an architectural concept that was revolutionary for its time. Instead of building on the surface of the rock, the monks decided to use its slopes, creating a multi-level structure where each floor served as the foundation for the next. The church was to crown the entire structure at the very top, while the auxiliary rooms were located on the lower levels, literally carved into the living rock. Construction began in 1203 under the direction of Master Guillaume of Diva, an outstanding architect of his time. His plan envisaged the creation of 3 main levels: the lower tier for domestic needs and receiving pilgrims, the middle tier for monastic life and worship, and the upper tier for the main altar and choirs. Each level symbolized a certain stage of spiritual ascent, from the earthly to the divine. The first task for the builders was to create a solid foundation. Deep niches were carved into the rock on the northern slope of the island to serve as the base for powerful buttresses. These stone supports, up to 4 meters thick, bore the enormous weight of the upper structures and transferred it directly to the rock foundation. How did medieval craftsmen know the principles of engineering mechanics, which were only rediscovered during the Renaissance? The building material was local granite from the island of Chaux, located 20 kilometers to the north. This stone was exceptionally strong and had a beautiful gray-pink hue, which gave the buildings a special solemnity. Delivering the material was a complex logistical challenge. Blocks weighing up to several tons had to be transported by sea during high tide, and then lifted up the steep slopes of the island. To solve this problem, the monks developed an ingenious system of lifting mechanisms. Wooden cranes with gates, powered by human or animal force, were installed at different levels of the cliff. The most powerful crane, called the Archangel's Hand by the builders, was located at the top of the island and could lift loads weighing up to 2 tons to a height of more than 30 meters. A distinctive feature of the Romanesque architecture of Mont-Saint-Michel was the use of the nested arches technique, in which arched structures of various sizes and shapes were nested inside each other, creating a complex system of mutual support. This technology made it possible to create spacious interior rooms with minimal wall thickness, which was critically important given the limited space on the island. The construction of the Romanesque church took more than 30 years. In 1064, the temple was consecrated in the presence of Duke William the Conqueror, who 2 years later would become King of England. But why did the future English king show such interest in the Norman abbey? Mont-Saint-Michel played a key role in the Duke's political plans as a symbol of Norman power and divine blessing for his dynasty. The completion of the Romanesque church was only the first stage of a grand project. The monks understood that the structure they had created, for all its grandeur, still fell short of the ideal of the heavenly temple that the Archangel Michael had revealed to Bishop Aubert in a vision. Even more ambitious plans lay ahead. requiring new architectural solutions and construction technologies. The construction of Mont-Saint-Michel became a school for a whole generation of medieval masters, whose names have gone down in architectural history. The construction work was led by master masons who possessed not only technical knowledge, but also a deep understanding of the symbolic meaning of each element of the temple. These masters kept their secrets strictly confidential, passing them on only to selected apprentices through a system of guild traditions that would continue for several more centuries. One of the outstanding masters who worked at Mont-Saint-Michel was a certain Guillaume, whose name is carved on one of the capitals of the Romanesque church. Researchers believe that it was he who developed a unique system for fastening stone blocks without using mortar in critical areas of the structure. The stones were fitted together with jeweler's precision, which gave the structure exceptional strength and allowed it to breathe during temperature changes and wind loads. How did medieval craftsmen achieve such precision in stonework without modern tools? The secret lay in the use of a system of templates and measuring instruments made of wood and metal. Each element of the structure was first drawn to scale on special wooden boards, and then the stone parts were carved according to these templates. Standard measures of length, kept in the monastery treasury, were used to control the dimensions. Particular attention was paid to the selection and processing of stone. The craftsmen distinguished between dozens of types of granite by density, color, and structure, choosing the most suitable material for each part of the building. The hardest dark gray granite was used for load-bearing structures, while a softer pinkish stone, which was easier to carve finely, was used for decorative elements. The tools of medieval stonemasons were surprisingly diverse and sophisticated. In addition to traditional hammers, chisels, and picks, the craftsmen used complex measuring instruments, squares, compasses, plumb lines, and levels. Blocks and pulleys were used to lift heavy blocks, the principle of which was borrowed from ancient technology and adapted to the conditions of medieval construction. The craftsmen of Mont-Saint-Michel were particularly proud of their vaulting technique. The semicircular Romanesque arches required a complex system of wooden scaffolding, which had to support the weight of the masonry until it was completely set. The scaffolding was constructed on the principle of temporary arches, precisely repeating the shape of the future arch. After the masonry was completed and the keystone was installed, the wooden structure was dismantled and the arch became self-supporting. But where did the funds for such an expensive construction come from? The work was financed from a variety of sources. Most of the expenses were covered by donations from pilgrims, who brought not only money to the abbey, but also precious relics, gold and silver items. Significant sums came from French kings and Norman dukes, who were interested in strengthening their prestige by patronizing the famous abbey. The monks also developed an ingenious system of selling indulgences related to the construction. Everyone who made a donation for the construction of the temple received a letter of absolution signed by the abbot. The size of the indulgence depended on the size of the donation. For a small amount, minor sins were forgiven, and for a significant donation, it was possible to receive complete absolution for a certain period. Construction work was carried out in accordance with the liturgical calendar. The most important operations, such as the installation of keystones or the consecration of altars, were timed to coincide with church holidays. Particular importance was attached to St. Michael's Day, September 29th, when new parts of the building were traditionally laid or completed structures were consecrated. How was it possible to coordinate the work of hundreds of craftsmen and apprentices working simultaneously on different parts of the construction site? The answer lies in the strict hierarchical organization of construction work. where everyone knew their place and responsibilities. At the head was the master architect, under whose leadership worked craftsmen of various specialties: masons, carpenters, roofers, glaziers. Each group of craftsmen had their own apprentices and students, forming a complex but effective system of division of labor. At the beginning of the 13th century, Mont-Saint-Michel faced a disaster that paradoxically led to the creation of its most beautiful part. In 1203, a fire destroyed a significant part of the Romanesque buildings on the north side of the abbey. The fire, which started in the wooden ceilings of the refectory, quickly spread throughout the monastery complex, reducing centuries of builders' labor to ashes. But could this tragedy be the beginning of an architectural miracle? French King Philip II Augustus, who had recently conquered Normandy from English King John Lackland, decided to rebuild the abbey in a new Gothic style. The royal gift of 3,000 livres in gold became the basis for the most ambitious construction project in the history of Mont-Saint-Michel. The new complex was to not only compensate for the losses from the fire, but also surpass in beauty everything that had been created before. The project was named La Merveille, the Wonder, and this name fully corresponded to the architect's intention. The Gothic complex was to rise on the northern slope of the island in the form of 3 tiers, each symbolizing a certain aspect of monastic life. The lower level was intended for receiving pilgrims and storing supplies, the middle level for the intellectual activities of the monks, and the upper level for prayer and contemplation. Construction of the miracle began in 1211 under the direction of an unknown master, whom modern researchers conventionally call Master of Mont-Saint-Michel. This nameless genius managed to create an architectural work that is still considered one of the most perfect examples of Gothic art. How did this unknown architect manage to surpass the renowned masters of his time? The secret lay in his revolutionary use of Gothic construction principles applied to the unique conditions of the rocky island. Instead of massive Romanesque walls, the architect created a system of slender columns and pointed arches that carried the weight of the stone vaults with surprising elegance. The walls were transformed into light screens, pierced by huge windows through which light flooded into the rooms. The most impressive room in the miracle is the Knight's Hall on the middle level. This grandiose space, 35 meters long and 11 meters wide, is covered by a system of pointed arches supported by 2 rows of slender columns. The capitals of the columns are decorated with carvings of floral ornaments so delicate that it seems as if the stone leaves are swaying in the breeze. The upper level of the miracle is occupied by the refectory, the place where the monastic brotherhood shared their meals. This room is a perfect example of Gothic architecture. The walls are almost completely dissolved into huge windows. The vault seems to float in the air, and the play of light and shadow creates the feeling of being in a heavenly palace. The acoustic properties of the hall allowed a single reader to be heard in all corners of the spacious room. But how was it possible to build such a light and elegant structure on a steep rocky slope? The answer lies in the ingenious system of buttresses and flying buttresses, which transfer the weight of the arches not inside the building, but outside to the rocky foundation. These stone crutches not only ensure the strength of the structure, but also create an expressive silhouette of the building, making it look like a ship sailing on the waves. The construction of the miracle took 17 years and was completed in 1228. During this time, several generations of craftsmen came and went, but the continuity of the architectural design was preserved thanks to detailed drawings and models stored in the monastery treasury. Each new craftsman contributed to the overall design without disrupting the unity of the architectural concept. The completion of the miracle marked the transformation of Mont-Saint-Michel into one of the most perfect monuments of Gothic art. But what was hidden behind this external beauty? What secrets did the underground rooms of the abbey hold? Beneath the majestic Gothic halls of Mont-Saint-Michel lies a mysterious underground world, whose history began at the same time as the construction of the abbey's first stone structures. Crypts, storerooms, prison cells, and secret passages form a complex system of underground rooms carved into the living rock of the island. What compelled the monks to create such extensive underground passages, and what secrets do they still hide? The oldest part of the underground complex is the crypt of Notre-Dame de Trente Cierges, built in the 11th century at the same time as the Romanesque church. This gloomy room served as a burial place for the abbey's noble benefactors and is a classic example of Romanesque architecture. Massive columns with simple cubic capitals support heavy vaults, and narrow loophole windows let in scant light, creating an atmosphere of eternal silence and peace. The crypt preserves the remains of 12th century frescoes depicting scenes from the life of the Archangel Michael. Despite damage from time and humidity, these paintings give an idea of the high artistic level of monastic art of that period. Of particular interest is a fresco depicting Bishop Ober's vision. The archangel in military armor points to a rocky island surrounded by raging sea waves. Next to the crypt is a large room that the monks called the underground church. This hall, with an area of more than 100 square meters, was used for worship in winter, when the upper church became too cold for long prayers. The acoustic properties of the underground temple are striking in their perfection. Even a whisper can be heard clearly in all corners of the hall, and the singing of psalms creates the effect of a heavenly choir. But why did a peaceful monastery need real prison cells? The history of Mont-Saint-Michel is not limited to spiritual activities. The abbey had extensive judicial powers over its lands and had the right to imprison criminals in its own prison. The underground cells, carved into the rock more than 10 meters below the surface, were considered among the most secure in all of France. The most sinister of the prison cells was called the Twins, because of its two parallel corridors connected by a narrow passageway. Particularly dangerous criminals and political prisoners were imprisoned here. The walls of the cells are covered with graffiti left by prisoners over the centuries. Names, dates, prayers, and curses carved into the stone by desperate people. Some of these inscriptions are of considerable historical value as evidence of the era. The system of underground galleries connecting different parts of the abbey deserves special attention. These corridors, about 2 meters high and 1.5 meters wide, were carved into the rock with remarkable precision. How did medieval builders navigate the thickness of the rock, avoiding collapses and hitting exactly the right spots? Modern research has shown that the monks used a complex system of acoustic navigation, orienting themselves by the sounds of bells and human voices. The abbey's underground chambers housed extensive storerooms for provisions. The natural temperature in the island's underground rooms is around 12 degrees Celsius all year round, which created ideal conditions for the long-term storage of grain, salt, wine, and other products. Some of these storerooms could hold supplies for several years, allowing the abbey to withstand long sieges. The most mysterious element of the underground complex is the water supply system. A reservoir was carved out of the rock, which was filled with rainwater flowing from the abbey's roofs through a system of gutters and pipes. But where could sources of fresh water have come from in the underground chambers of an island surrounded by salt water? Legend has it that the spring was created when the Archangel Michael touched the rock with his sword. But geological studies have revealed a more prosaic explanation. Fresh water seeps through cracks in the granite from higher levels. What else might be hidden in the unexplored areas of Mont-Saint-Michel's underground labyrinth? Modern ground-penetrating radar scanning techniques have revealed the existence of additional cavities in the rock, which have not yet been accessed. Perhaps these hidden rooms hold undiscovered secrets from the abbey's thousand-year history. Behind the majestic walls of Mont-Saint-Michel, a special life has been lived for over 1,000 years, subject to the strict rules of Saint Benedict of Nursia. At its peak, the abbey's monastic community numbered up to 60 brothers, each of whom devoted himself to serving God and the Archangel Michael. But what was everyday life like for the monks in this unique monastery, cut off from the world by the tides? The monks' day began long before dawn with matins at 2 o'clock in the morning. In complete darkness, the brethren gathered in the choir of the church for the first service of the day, which lasted about an hour. The singing of psalms in the Gothic church created a special atmosphere of mystical union with the heavenly powers. Matins was followed by a short rest, then lauds at dawn, prime at 6 in the morning, terce at 9, sext at noon, none at 3 in the afternoon, vespers at sunset, and compline before bedtime. Between services, the monks engaged in physical labor, which Saint Benedict considered necessary for spiritual perfection. The abbey had various workshops, a scriptorium for copying manuscripts, an apothecary for making medicines, a bakery, a brewery, a smithy, and a carpentry workshop. Each monk had his own obedience depending on his abilities and inclinations. The scriptorium, a workshop for copying and decorating manuscripts, was of particular importance in the life of the monastery. The library of Mont-Saint-Michel was considered one of the richest in medieval Europe and contained more than 300 volumes, a huge number for that time. But what texts did the monks copy, and did all of them correspond to official church doctrine? The scriptorium employed highly skilled copyists, each of whom specialized in a particular type of text. Some copied liturgical books and the lives of saints, while others copied the works of the church fathers and theological treatises. But among the abbey's manuscripts were also some very unusual texts: alchemical treatises, astrological calendars, medical recipes, and even translations of Arabic scientific works. The monks of Mont-Saint-Michel were renowned for their knowledge of medicine and natural sciences. The abbey had a hospital not only for the brethren, but also for pilgrims, who often suffered injuries while crossing dangerous tidal flats. The monastery pharmacy produced medicines from local herbs, many of which had unique healing properties due to the island's special maritime climate. The monks' diet was modest but nutritious. The basis of their diet was bread, vegetables, fish, and dairy products. Meat was consumed only in exceptional cases, during illness or major holidays. The monks grew their own vegetables in gardens laid out on terraces on the island, and raised sheep and cows on mainland pastures belonging to the abbey. But how did the monastic community cope with the isolation of the island and the psychological pressure of confined space? The charter provided for a system of spiritual guidance, whereby each young monk was assigned a mentor from among the experienced brothers. Regular conversations with a spiritual father helped to overcome temptations and emotional crises, which were inevitable in monastic life. Hospitality occupied a special place in the life of the monastery. Mont-Saint-Michel had extensive facilities for receiving pilgrims of all classes, from simple peasants to kings and dukes. Each guest received shelter, food, and spiritual guidance in accordance with their social status. Wealthy pilgrims were accommodated in comfortable rooms on the upper level, while the poor stayed in common halls on the lower level. The intellectual life of the abbey was exceptionally rich. The monks studied the 7 liberal arts: grammar, rhetoric, dialectic, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. The monastery had a school where not only future monks, but also children from noble families were taught. But was education at the abbey limited to traditional church subjects? Modern research into monastic manuscripts shows that the monks of Mont-Saint-Michel took a keen interest in a wide variety of fields of knowledge, from theology to astrology, from history to alchemy. Some of the brothers were renowned scholars of their time, and their works were copied in other monasteries and universities across Europe. Perhaps it was this openness to new knowledge and ideas that made the abbey a center not only of spiritual, but also of intellectual life in the Middle Ages. Discipline in the monastery was maintained by strict rules, but punishments were well thought out and aimed at correction rather than intimidation. For minor offenses, a monk could be deprived of participation in the common meal and had to eat bread and water alone. More serious violations were followed by temporary exclusion from worship services. The most severe punishment was expulsion from the monastery, which was used extremely rarely. The abbey was administered by an abbot, elected by the brethren for life. The abbot had almost unlimited power within the monastery, but had to follow the rule of Saint Benedict and the traditions of the monastery. The abbot's assistants were the prior, the cellarer, who was responsible for the economy, the librarian, who was responsible for the manuscripts, and several other officials. The abbey's economic activities were quite diverse. The monastery owned extensive lands in Normandy and Brittany, which brought in significant income from agriculture. Sheep breeding was particularly profitable, as their wool was highly valued on European markets. In addition, the abbey received income from tolls for crossing the bay, from the sale of indulgences, and from donations from pilgrims. But was life in the monastic community always peaceful and harmonious? Documents testify to periodic conflicts between monks, especially over the election of the abbot or the distribution of monastic offices. Some disputes became so acute that the intervention of papal legates or royal officials was required. These conflicts show that even within the walls of a holy monastery, human passions did not always give way to divine grace. A distinctive feature of Mont-Saint-Michel was that many of the monks came from noble families in Normandy and other regions of France. They brought not only rich donations to the monastery, but also connections with influential secular circles. This turned the abbey into an important political center where decisions were made that affected the fate of entire regions. The monastic community also played an important role in preserving and transmitting cultural traditions. Various arts were cultivated in the abbey: music, painting, sculpture, and architecture. Many monks were talented artists who created works not only to decorate their own monastery, but also on commission from other ecclesiastical and secular clients. How did the island's isolation affect the spiritual life of the monks? Many brothers perceived it as a blessing, allowing them to focus entirely on prayer and contemplation. The rhythm of the tides created a special atmosphere of cyclicality, reminiscent of the eternity and transience of human existence. The sound of the waves became a natural backdrop for meditation, and the majestic sunsets over the sea were a source of spiritual inspiration. From the moment of its foundation, Mont-Saint-Michel became one of the main centers of Christian pilgrimage in Western Europe, attracting believers from all corners of the continent. The route to the shrine of the Archangel Michael, known as the Way of Saint Michael, stretched from Italy through the Alps, Switzerland, and France to the shores of Normandy. Every year, thousands of pilgrims traveled hundreds of kilometers to worship the relics and pray in the temple built at the behest of the Archangel himself. What attracted medieval people to this distant and inaccessible place? In Christian tradition, Archangel Michael was revered as the leader of the heavenly host, the defender of the faithful, and the guide of souls to the afterlife. His cult grew particularly strong during the Crusades, when the warlike archangel became the patron saint of Christian knights. Many crusaders considered it their duty to visit Mont-Saint-Michel before departing for the Holy Land. Pilgrimages to the shrines of Archangel Michael also had practical significance. The Church promised complete forgiveness of sins to those who made the journey to Mont-Saint-Michel with sincere repentance in their hearts. For medieval people, who were constantly thinking about the salvation of their souls, such an opportunity was extremely attractive. Pilgrimages on St. Michael's Day, September 29th, when the abbey granted special indulgences, were especially popular. The journey to the island was fraught with danger and hardship. Pilgrims had to cross hostile territories where robbers and unscrupulous toll collectors awaited them. Many traveled in groups for mutual protection, forming pilgrim brotherhoods under the patronage of local lords or church authorities. But the most dangerous part of the journey was crossing the tidal flats of the Bay of Saint-Malo. The monks of the abbey organized a special service of guides to accompany pilgrims across the quicksand. These people, called passers, knew every safe path and every dangerous spot in the bay. They determined the time of the crossing depending on the tide schedule, monitored weather conditions, and warned of dangers. For their services, the passers received payment from the abbey and donations from pilgrims. An entire town sprang up on the mainland to serve the needs of pilgrims. It was home to hotels, taverns, shops selling religious relics, and workshops making pilgrims' staffs and bags. The trade in lead badges depicting the Archangel Michael, which served as proof of a completed pilgrimage, was particularly flourishing. These ensigns are found by archaeologists throughout Europe, from England to Poland. But how did the abbey cope with the influx of thousands of pilgrims, especially on major holidays? The monks created a complex system for accommodating guests, depending on their social status and financial means. For ordinary pilgrims, there were common halls on the lower level of the abbey, where they received modest food and a place to sleep on straw mattresses. Noble pilgrims were accommodated in comfortable rooms on the middle level, furnished and decorated with tapestries. Kings and the highest nobility could count on luxurious apartments in the most prestigious parts of the abbey. Each category of guests was served by appropriate staff and received food befitting their rank. Special attention was paid to sick and infirm pilgrims. The abbey had a hospital where experienced monk doctors provided medical care to all those in need. Many believed in the miraculous power of the relics of the Archangel Michael and came in the hope of healing from various ailments. The abbey's chronicles are full of stories of miraculous recoveries that took place within the walls of the holy monastery. The economic significance of pilgrimage for the abbey was enormous. Pilgrims' donations made up a significant part of the monastery's income and made it possible to finance grandiose construction projects. Particularly generous, were the gifts from kings and nobles, who donated not only gold and silver, but also land holdings, trading privileges, and other valuables. What role did pilgrimage play in the cultural exchange of medieval Europe? Pilgrims brought not only money to Mont-Saint-Michel, but also news, ideas, and artistic examples from various countries. The monks of the abbey were well informed about events throughout the Christian world thanks to the stories of pilgrims. This turned the island into a kind of information center, where trade routes and cultural influences intersected. Pilgrimages also contributed to the development of the road network and the hotel business along the entire route to Mont-Saint-Michel. The towns and monasteries along the pilgrims' route prospered thanks to the income from serving travelers. Thus, the sanctuary of the Archangel Michael became not only a spiritual, but also an economic center, whose influence extended far beyond Normandy. Mont-Saint-Michel's strategic location on the border between Normandy and Brittany made the abbey not only a spiritual center, but also an important military outpost. From the end of the 10th century, the island became a powerful fortress, capable of withstanding a long siege and controlling the sea approaches to the Normandy coast. But how did a peaceful monastic retreat turn into an impregnable military bastion? The process of fortifying the island began under Duke Richard I the Fearless, who understood the strategic importance of this place. In 967, on his orders, the first defensive walls with towers and loopholes were erected around the abbey. These fortifications were intended to protect not only the monks, but also the population of the surrounding villages, who could take refuge on the island during enemy raids. The uniqueness of Mont-Saint-Michel's defensive system lay in its use of the natural features of the terrain. The tides turned the island into a natural fortress, surrounded by a water barrier up to 18 kilometers wide. The enemy could only approach the abbey walls at low tide, but at the same time risked being cut off by the incoming tide. What army would dare to storm the fortress, knowing about such a deadly trap? The first serious test of the island's defensive power came in 1014, when the Breton Count Conan captured a significant part of western Normandy. His troops laid siege to Mont-Saint-Michel, but the assault ended in disaster. The Breton knights, who launched their attack at low tide, were caught by the rising tide, and most of them drowned in the turbulent waters of the bay. This defeat so shocked contemporaries that it was attributed to the direct intervention of the Archangel Michael. In the 11th century, under Duke William the Conqueror, the island's fortifications were significantly strengthened. New towers were built, the walls were reinforced, and a system of underground passages was created to supply the garrison during a siege. Particular attention was paid to creating food and water reserves that would allow the island to withstand a blockade lasting many months. But who defended the monastery fortress? Monks or professional warriors? In peacetime, the island was guarded by monks under the leadership of a specially appointed brother constable, who was responsible for military training and maintaining combat readiness. However, in the event of a serious threat, a detachment of professional knights sent by the duke or king would arrive on the island. The most severe test for the fortress was the 100 Years' War between France and England. In 1364, English troops captured most of Normandy, but Mont-Saint-Michel was one of the few French outposts that never surrendered to the invaders. The island withstood numerous sieges, becoming a symbol of French resistance to English occupation. The defenders' strategy was based on taking advantage of the island's location. The English could not use traditional siege tactics with trebuchets and other siege engines, as their positions were flooded during high tide. Attempts to blockade the island from the sea were also ineffective due to the difficult navigational conditions in the bay. What role did Mont-Saint-Michel play in the overall French defense strategy? The island served as a base for French privateers who attacked English merchant ships in the English Channel. In addition, it was used to communicate with the English enemies of the French king, who received money and instructions from Paris via the abbey. In 1424, the English made their most ambitious attempt to capture the island. Under the command of the Duke of Bedford, a huge army was assembled with powerful siege weapons. However, this siege also ended in failure. The defenders used new defensive technologies, including the first examples of firearms. The heroic defense of Mont-Saint-Michel during the 100 Years' War made the island a national symbol of France. After the expulsion of the English in the 15th century, King Louis I established the Order of St. Michael, whose symbol was an image of the Archangel trampling a defeated dragon. Thus, a peaceful monastic retreat became one of the main symbols of French statehood and military valor. Even after the end of the 100 Years' War, the military significance of Mont-Saint-Michel did not diminish. The island continued to serve as a fortress controlling access to the Normandy coast, and its garrison participated in repelling enemy landing attempts. But a new era would bring the island a completely different, grim fame, when the impregnable fortress was turned into a state prison. In the 17th century, Mont-Saint-Michel underwent a dramatic transformation. From a thriving spiritual center and symbol of French valor, it became one of the most sinister state prisons in the kingdom. This metamorphosis began with the gradual decline of monastic life in the abbey and ended with the complete secularization of the island during the French Revolution. What led to such a radical change in the purpose of this sacred place? The decline of monastic life at Mont-Saint-Michel began in the 16th century, when the system of commendatory administration allowed secular individuals to receive income from the abbey without taking on spiritual obligations. The abbot's commanders rarely visited the island, preferring to receive profits and spend them at the royal court. The monastic community dwindled to a few dozen people, and many buildings fell into disrepair. In 1639, Cardinal Richelieu, the all-powerful minister of Louis XIII, decided to turn the abbey into a state prison for political prisoners. The island's isolation, powerful medieval fortifications, and established supply system made it an ideal place to hold particularly dangerous criminals against the state. But could the ancient walls, built for prayer, bear witness to human suffering? The first prisoners of the new prison were opponents of royal power, participants in noble conspiracies, Jansenists, and Protestants who refused to convert to Catholicism. The conditions of detention depended on the prisoners' social status and the severity of their crimes. Noble prisoners were housed in relatively comfortable cells on the upper floors, received good food, and could count on visits from relatives. Commoners were held in appalling conditions in underground cells, where dampness, cold, and complete darkness reigned. These rooms, known as iron cages, were windowless stone boxes where prisoners could only lie or sit on straw matting. Many could not endure such conditions and died of disease or went mad. Who were the most famous prisoners of the Bastille of the Seas, as Mont-Saint-Michel was called? Among the prisoners were prominent figures of their time: Abbé Dubois, accused of Jansenism; the Marquis de Brion, a participant in the conspiracy against Cardinal Mazarin; and many Protestant preachers who refused to recognize the revocation of the Edict of Nantes. Each of them had their own tragic story of arrest, trial, and imprisonment. The fate of Nicolas Fouquet, former superintendent of finances to Louis XIV, was particularly sad. This once all-powerful minister was arrested on charges of embezzling state funds and imprisoned at Mont-Saint-Michel for 19 years. In his letters, secretly smuggled to the mainland, Fouquet described the horrors of imprisonment and the gradual destruction of human dignity in conditions of complete isolation. The prison was run by a royal governor who reported directly to the Minister of War. It was guarded by a garrison of several dozen soldiers and prison guards. Corruption flourished at all levels. Bribes could buy better food, allow letters to be sent to the mainland, or even arrange visits with relatives. But were escapes from this sea prison possible? History has preserved several examples of escape attempts, most of which ended tragically. Even those fugitives who managed to leave the island drowned in the treacherous waters of the bay or got stuck in the quicksand. The only successful escape was made in the 17th century by a nobleman who bribed a fisherman and was secretly taken to the mainland at low tide. Living conditions in the prison gradually deteriorated due to underfunding and corruption in the administration. The abbey buildings, which were not designed for use as a prison, quickly fell into disrepair. Medieval heating and ventilation systems could not provide even minimal comfort, especially in winter, when the temperature in the cells dropped below zero. What role did Mont-Saint-Michel prison play in the royal justice system? The island became a place of imprisonment for those whom the authorities wanted not only to punish, but also to forget. Many prisoners were held without trial or investigation on the personal order of the king, issued in the form of a sealed letter, a lettre de cachet. This practice was criticized by the Enlightenment thinkers, who saw it as a symbol of the despotism of the old regime. The French Revolution put an end to the prison period in the history of Mont-Saint-Michel. In 1791, the last political prisoners were released, and the island was declared a national treasure. But the revolutionary authorities found a new use for the former prison, which turned out to be no less grim than the previous one. The French Revolution freed Mont-Saint-Michel from its role as a state prison. But instead of a revival, the island fell into a period of deep decline and desolation. In 1792, the National Assembly passed a decree closing all monasteries, officially ending the abbey's 1,000-year history. The last monks left the island, taking with them the most valuable relics and manuscripts. But what awaited this sacred place, deprived of its centuries-old guardians? The revolutionary authorities declared Mont-Saint-Michel a national treasure and tried to find a new use for it. Various options were considered: turning it into a fortress, creating a naval academy, or setting up a factory. However, the island's isolation and transportation difficulties made most of these projects unfeasible. As a result, it was decided to continue using the island as a prison, but now for ordinary criminals. The new prison system was radically different from the previous practice of holding political prisoners. Now, thieves, murderers, counterfeiters, and other criminals were held within the walls of the former abbey. The conditions of detention became even more cruel. Prisoners were forced to work in workshops making straw hats, which were sold to finance the prison. What damage did secularization bring to the ancient architectural complex? The new owners of the island did not understand the historical and artistic value of the medieval buildings. Many rooms were rebuilt for prison needs, without regard for their original purpose. Gothic windows were bricked up, elegant columns were chopped down for ease of supervision, and priceless frescoes were covered with lime. The abbey church suffered particularly badly. It was turned into a prison workshop, with the interior space divided into several floors by wooden partitions. The altar was destroyed, the stained glass windows were smashed, and looms were installed in place of the choir stalls. The medieval library, which contained unique manuscripts, was sold off or destroyed. Many manuscripts were used as wrapping paper in local markets. The fate of the abbey's art treasures was no less tragic. Gold and silver reliquaries were confiscated by the state and melted down to replenish the treasury. Statues of saints were smashed as symbols of superstition and obscurantism. The surviving works of art were sold to private collectors or simply disappeared in the chaos of the revolutionary years. How did the decline of Mont-Saint-Michel affect the surrounding areas? The closure of the abbey left hundreds of people who had served the needs of the monastery and pilgrims without work. Local artisans, merchants, and hotel employees were left without a livelihood. Many left the region in search of work, and the once prosperous towns on the mainland coast turned into semi-abandoned villages. The Napoleonic era did not bring about a revival of the island. The emperor, preoccupied with wars in Europe, paid little attention to the remote corners of his empire. Mont-Saint-Michel continued to serve as a prison, and the conditions of detention became even harsher. A system of solitary confinement was introduced, which was considered more humane, but in fact broke the prisoner's psyche. In 1815, after the fall of Napoleon, the new authorities considered the possibility of restoring the abbey, but these plans did not receive support. The Catholic Church, weakened by the upheavals of the Revolution, did not have the means to restore the ruined monastery. The island continued to be used as a prison, gradually falling into ruin. Were there any attempts to draw public attention to the deplorable state of this historical monument? In the first half of the 19th century, a movement began to preserve French cultural heritage. Romantic writers such as Victor Hugo and Chateaubriand praised the beauty of medieval architecture in their works and called for the protection of historical monuments from destruction. Victor Hugo played a special role in drawing attention to the fate of Mont-Saint-Michel, calling the island a pyramid in the ocean and comparing it to the greatest wonders of the world. In 1831, he published a passionate appeal to save the abbey, which made a strong impression on the French intelligentsia and paved the way for future restoration work. But it would take decades of struggle before public opinion forced the authorities to stop the barbaric use of this unique architectural monument and begin its scientific restoration. The mid-19th century marked a turning point in the fate of Mont-Saint-Michel. The growing movement to preserve France's historical heritage, led by such prominent figures as architect Eugène Viollet-le-Duc and writer Prosper Mérimée, finally reached political circles. In 1863, Emperor Napoleon III made the historic decision to close the prison on the island and begin work on restoring the abbey. But could modern science revive an architectural marvel that had suffered from 3 centuries of neglect? The restoration work was entrusted to architect Édouard Courrouet, a student of the famous Viollet-le-Duc. Courrouet approached the task with scientific rigor, studying all available historical documents, plans, and images of the abbey. His goal was not simply to repair the damaged buildings, but to restore them to their original appearance based on a deep understanding of medieval architecture. The first stage of the work was to free the Gothic halls from prison superstructures and partitions. When the workers removed the wooden floors that divided the church into several floors, a majestic space appeared before the astonished contemporaries, the beauty of which they had not even suspected. Under layers of lime and plaster, elegant column capitals, fragments of medieval frescoes, and carved details of portals were discovered. What discoveries awaited the restorers during the work? The dismantling of the prison buildings revealed many architectural elements that were thought to be lost. Fragments of an 11th century Romanesque church, walled up during renovations, were found in the basements. Under the floor of the Gothic refectory, the remains of an 8th century Carolingian building, the oldest part of the abbey, were discovered. Particular attention was paid to restoring the roofs and spires that define the island's silhouette. The medieval roofs were covered with lead sheets, but in the 19th century, this expensive material was replaced with more affordable slate. Corruyer insisted on using traditional materials and techniques, which significantly increased the cost of the work, but ensured the authenticity of the restoration. The most difficult task was to restore the spire of the church, which crowned the entire architectural ensemble. The original Romanesque tower was demolished in the 18th century as a threat to safety. Corruyer created a new spire in the Gothic style, which blended harmoniously with the overall appearance of the abbey, although it did not correspond to historical accuracy. But did the architect have the right to such a creative interpretation? This question sparked heated debate among historians and architects. Proponents of a strictly scientific approach criticized Corruyer for deviating from historical truth. Defenders argued that the main goal of restoration was to restore the overall artistic impression, not museum-like accuracy in details. This controversy reflected broader debates about the principles of restoring architectural monuments. Archaeological research was conducted in parallel with the architectural work. Excavations on the island revealed traces of settlements from various eras, from the Gallo-Roman period to the late Middle Ages. The artifacts found, ceramics, coins, jewelry, tools, helped to recreate a picture of the daily life of the island's inhabitants over the centuries. How was the large-scale restoration work financed? The state covered most of the costs, but significant funds came from private donors inspired by the idea of reviving this national monument. Particularly generous donations were made by descendants of ancient Norman families who considered Mont-Saint-Michel a symbol of their historical heritage. The work continued for more than 30 years and was officially completed in 1897. By this time, the island had become one of the most visited tourist attractions in France. The railway line to the mainland made Mont-Saint-Michel accessible to the general public. Thousands of tourists came to admire the revived wonder of medieval architecture. The success of the restoration of Mont-Saint-Michel became a model for similar projects throughout Europe. Architects from other countries working on the restoration of medieval monuments studied Corruyer's experience. Thus, the island, which once symbolized the decline of historical heritage, became a symbol of its revival and scientific study. But even after the completion of the main work, research on the island continued. Each new generation of scientists brought their own methods and discoveries, gradually revealing new secrets of the thousand-year history of Mont-Saint-Michel. The 20th century brought Mont-Saint-Michel into a new era of scientific research, when modern archaeological methods allowed scientists to penetrate the deepest secrets of the island. Systematic excavations, begun in the 1920s, gradually revealed the multi-layered history of this amazing place. Each new archaeological season brought discoveries that forced a rethinking of established ideas about the abbey's past. But what secrets did the island's soil hide from the eyes of previous generations of researchers? The first scientific excavations were conducted under the direction of archaeologist Henri Descartes, who used the latest stratigraphic analysis methods available at the time. His team discovered that the modern island is a kind of layer cake of buildings from different eras. Beneath the Gothic foundations of the 13th century lay the remains of Romanesque structures from the 11th century, and even deeper, traces of Carolingian buildings from the 8th century. The most sensational discovery was the discovery of traces of a pre-Christian sanctuary at the top of the cliff. Archaeologists found fragments of Celtic sacrificial altars and Gallo-Roman altars, confirming the hypothesis that the island was a sacred place long before the arrival of Christianity. But did this mean that the choice of location for the abbey was not accidental, but based on ancient religious traditions? Further research revealed a surprising continuity in the use of the island as a religious center. The Celts worshipped the god Belinus here, associated with the sun and healing. The Romans built a temple to Mercury, the guide of souls to the afterlife. Christians dedicated the island to the Archangel Michael, who was also considered a psychopomp, a guide for souls. This continuity could not be a mere coincidence. Archaeologists were particularly interested in the island's underground structures. Georadar surveys conducted in the 1990s revealed an extensive network of artificial caves and tunnels, many of which remain inaccessible to this day. Some of these underground rooms clearly had a ritual purpose and contained traces of ceremonies whose nature remained a mystery. What were these mysterious underground rituals? Analysis of the artifacts found, bronze bowls, stone altars, and incense remains, suggests that rituals beyond the scope of official Christian liturgy were practiced in the abbey's underground chambers. Perhaps the monks preserved elements of ancient mystical traditions, adapted to the Christian worldview. Excavations in the former scriptorium yielded another important discovery. Under the floor of the workshop, a cache of manuscript fragments was found, probably walled up during the revolutionary pogroms. Among the preserved texts were not only liturgical books, but also treatises on astrology, alchemy, and Kabbalah, knowledge that the official church of the time considered heretical. A study of these texts showed that the intellectual life of the abbey was much richer and more diverse than previously thought. The monks studied the works of Arab philosophers, translated Greek texts, and experimented with alchemical operations. But how did they manage to combine such activities with Orthodox Christianity? The answer to this question was provided by paleographic studies of the manuscripts found. Many texts contained encrypted messages written using complex ciphers and allegories. The monks developed a sophisticated system for concealing forbidden knowledge under the guise of harmless religious treatises. This required a high level of intellectual ability and a deep familiarity with various philosophical traditions. Modern dating methods have made it possible to establish the exact chronology of the artifacts found. Radiocarbon analysis of organic remains confirmed that the most ancient traces of human activity on the island date back to the Bronze Age, more than 3,000 years ago. Dendrochronological research of wooden structures clarified the dates of construction of various parts of the abbey. What secrets might the unexplored parts of the island still hold? Geophysical studies in recent decades have revealed anomalies in the rock strata that may indicate the existence of hidden chambers or tunnels. Some of these voids are located at considerable depths and may contain artifacts of exceptional importance. Of particular interest is the system of water channels carved into the rock, discovered in the 2000s. These channels not only provided water to the abbey, but could also have been used for ritual ablutions. Their complex geometry suggests a knowledge of the principles of sacred architecture that modern science is only beginning to understand. Archaeological research at Mont-Saint-Michel continues to this day. Each new method of analysis, from laser scanning to genetic research, reveals new aspects of the island's history. Perhaps the most surprising discoveries are yet to come, and the millennial secrets of the abbey will find their explanation in the works of future generations of scientists. The library of Mont-Saint-Michel, which once contained hundreds of unique manuscripts, has become the key to understanding the intellectual life of the medieval abbey. Despite being plundered during the Revolution, modern scholars have managed to restore a significant part of the collection through painstaking searches in libraries and private collections throughout Europe. But what secrets did the monks hide in their carefully transcribed texts? And why was some of this knowledge considered so dangerous? The cataloging of the surviving manuscripts at the end of the 20th century revealed the surprising diversity of interests of the monastic community. Along with traditional liturgical books and lives of saints, the library housed medical treatises, astronomical tables, alchemical recipes, philosophical writings, and even translations of Arabic scientific texts. This showed that the abbey was not just a religious center, but also a hub of advanced scholarship of its time. Researchers were particularly interested in a manuscript called The Mirror of Nature, created in the abbey's scriptorium in the 13th century. This voluminous work contained a systematic exposition of alchemical knowledge, supplemented by exquisite miniatures depicting laboratory equipment and chemical processes. But where did the monks get such profound knowledge of experimental chemistry? Analysis of the text showed that the author of the manuscript was familiar with the works of Arab alchemists, in particular those of Jabir ibn Hayyan and al-Razi. This suggested the existence of developed intellectual links between the abbey and centers of Islamic scholarship in Spain and Sicily. The monks not only translated Arabic texts, but also conducted their own experiments, the results of which were recorded in encrypted form. No less intriguing was the astrological treatise, the Book of Celestial Influences, dated to the 12th century. This manuscript contained detailed horoscopes of French kings and nobles, as well as predictions of important historical events. The accuracy of some of the predictions was particularly striking, suggesting that the monks had sources of information that were not available to their contemporaries. But did the brothers use astrology only for predictions, or was there something more behind it? A detailed analysis of astrological texts revealed that the monks viewed stellar influences not as fatal predestination, but as a tool for choosing the most favorable time for various actions. They compiled calendars for important ceremonies, the laying of foundations for buildings, the start of journeys, and even for treating the sick. This practical astrology was closely linked to medicine and alchemy, forming a unified system of knowledge about the hidden connections between the heavenly and earthly worlds. Among the medical manuscripts, the Herbal of Archangel Michael stood out as a unique collection of recipes for medicines based on local plants. The monks described in detail not only how to prepare the potions, but also the time of gathering the herbs and the phases of the moon when their healing properties were strongest. Many of these recipes included ingredients that could only be found in the specific conditions of the tidal bay. What knowledge was hidden behind these seemingly simple medical recipes? Modern pharmacological expertise has shown that many of the plants used by the monks do indeed have powerful healing properties. But the composition of some potions included components that, in certain combinations, could cause altered states of consciousness or mystical visions. A special place in the collection of manuscripts was occupied by texts that researchers tentatively called the Grimoires of Mont-Saint-Michel. These works contained descriptions of rituals for summoning angels, instructions for making talismans and amulets, as well as complex geometric diagrams whose purpose remained unclear. All these texts were written in Latin using special terminology that was only understandable to the initiated. Handwriting analysis showed that many of these esoteric texts were created by a small group of monks over several generations. They passed on their knowledge from teacher to student, constantly supplementing and refining the information they received. This suggested the existence of a secret brotherhood within the abbey that was engaged in the study of the occult sciences. But how did the church authorities feel about such activities within the monastery walls? A study of the abbot's correspondence with bishops and papal legates showed that the higher clergy knew about the unusual interests of the brethren, but turned a blind eye to them. Perhaps the patronage of influential secular patrons who needed astrological predictions and alchemical preparations protected the monks from accusations of heresy. Among the surviving manuscripts, the encrypted diary of a certain Brother Nicholas, who lived in the 14th century, stood out. This text, written in a complex letter cipher, remained undecipherable for a long time. It was only at the end of the 20th century that cryptographers managed to partially read its contents. The diary described strange experiments with crystals, metals, and plant extracts, the purpose of which was to achieve perfect knowledge of the nature of things. Of particular interest were Brother Nicholas's notes on underground ceremonies held deep within the island. He mentioned the Brotherhood of the Luminous, a group of select monks who practiced special rituals in underground crypts. These ceremonies included meditation by the light of crystals, the burning of special incense, and the recitation of spells in ancient languages. Could these rituals be related to Christian mystical traditions, or were the monks practicing something more ancient? An analysis of the terminology used revealed elements dating back to pre-Christian religious practices. Perhaps the brothers preserved and adapted the rituals of the Celtic Druids who once performed ceremonies on the sacred island. The deciphering of the last pages of the diary brought another surprising discovery. Brother Nicholas wrote about a great concealment that was to take place in the future. He predicted that the knowledge accumulated by generations of monks would be hidden until humanity was ready to receive it. Perhaps many of the abbey's secrets still await their hour in the unexplored underground chambers of the island. Today, Mont-Saint-Michel stands before us as a living testimony to 1,000 years of history, the embodiment of the human striving for perfection and the divine. The island's current status as a UNESCO World Heritage Site reflects its exceptional value not only for France, but for all of humanity. Every year, more than 3 million visitors climb the ancient steps to the top of the rock, following the path laid down by medieval pilgrims. But what does this heritage represent in the context of the modern world, and what lessons can humanity learn from it? The architectural significance of Mont-Saint-Michel goes far beyond that of a simple historical monument. The abbey demonstrates the evolution of European architecture from the Carolingian period to the late Gothic, representing a unique encyclopedia of medieval building art. The engineering solutions used in its construction on a tiny rocky island are still studied by modern architects as examples of ingenious adaptation to difficult natural conditions. Of particular value is the Gothic complex Miracle, which is considered one of the most perfect examples of French Gothic architecture. Its design principles, the use of pointed arches, ribbed vaults, and buttresses, revolutionized medieval construction and formed the basis of the architecture of the entire Gothic era. Can we say that it was here that the ideas that defined the appearance of European cities for centuries to come were born? The cultural heritage of the abbey is no less significant. For centuries, Mont-Saint-Michel was a center of intellectual life, where monks not only preserved ancient knowledge, but also developed new fields of science. Their works on astronomy, medicine, alchemy, and philosophy laid the foundations for future scientific achievements. The traditions of book culture that developed in the abbey's scriptorium contributed to the spread of literacy and education throughout Europe. Modern research shows that the abbey's influence extended far beyond the religious sphere. The economic model developed by the monks included elements of international trade, banking, and insurance that anticipated many principles of the modern economy. The hospitality system created to serve pilgrims became the prototype for the modern tourism industry. What role does Mont-Saint-Michel play in modern French society? The island remains an important symbol of national identity, embodying French genius and cultural traditions. Its image adorns postage stamps, coins, and banknotes, and the silhouette of the abbey has become one of the most recognizable symbols of France, along with the Eiffel Tower and the Arc de Triomphe. The island's religious significance also remains to this day. Since 1966, the abbey has once again been home to a monastic community, a small brotherhood that upholds the traditions of prayer and hospitality. Modern monks combine ancient duties with new tasks. They participate in scientific research, conduct educational work, and help preserve historical heritage. The scientific value of the island continues to be revealed thanks to new research methods. The use of laser scanning, ground-penetrating radar, and other modern technologies allows hidden architectural elements and artifacts to be discovered. Interdisciplinary research brings together archaeologists, historians, architects, geologists, and other specialists in an effort to understand all aspects of the abbey's rich history. But is the island facing modern challenges? Mass tourism creates certain problems for the preservation of the monument. The daily presence of thousands of visitors has an impact on the ancient structures, requiring constant monitoring and preventive maintenance. Climate change is also affecting the island. Rising sea levels and increasingly severe storms threaten coastal erosion and flooding. To address these issues, an ambitious project has been developed to restore the maritime character of Mont-Saint-Michel. The dam, built in the 19th century for vehicle access, partially blocked the natural circulation of the tides, leading to the silting up of the bay. A new bridge and a system of sluices have restored the natural processes, returning the island to its original appearance. The educational significance of Mont-Saint-Michel cannot be overstated. The island serves as a living laboratory for the study of medieval history, architecture, religious culture, and ecology. Universities from around the world organize student internships and research programs here. A specially created educational center offers courses and seminars for specialists in various fields of knowledge. What does the future hold for this unique place? Plans for the island's development aim to strike a balance between preserving its historical heritage and meeting the needs of modern society. New virtual reality technologies will allow visitors to travel through the abbey in different historical eras without damaging the ancient structures. Digital reconstruction projects are helping to restore the appearance of lost parts of the complex. Mont-Saint-Michel remains a source of inspiration for contemporary architects, artists, and writers. Its image appears in literature, cinema, and other art forms, continuing a tradition of cultural influence that began more than 1,000 years ago. Thus, the ancient dream of a heavenly city, embodied in stone by medieval craftsmen, continues to live on and inspire new generations of people in their pursuit of beauty and sublimity.